Hello and welcome to the Let's Learn dotNET. Today we will be speaking about Blazor. My name is Gomolemo Mohapi. I am a cloud advocate here at Microsoft, and I'm here with my colleague Lebo.
Hello everyone, and thank you, Homo. My name is Lebogang Madise. I'm an Azure Go-to-Market Manager for Digital and App Innovation Business at Microsoft, joining you from South Africa today.
Yes, no, that is true. We are both from South Africa, and we're really excited to be sharing this content with you today. So as I said, we will be covering... Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, as I said, we'll be covering Blazor. The specific module we'll be covering is the dotNET Connect 4 module. So we'll be building the Connect 4 game with Blazor and dotNET. We will talk about what the Connect 4 game entails, as long as how to build that game with Blazor. But if you want to follow along, this is the link to the module up on Microsoft Learn. But we suggest that you watch us through this walkthrough first, and then afterwards, if you want to go more in detail, you can go through the module as well.
Yeah, and what I like about this is that it's using a game that we all know. So normally I play noughts and crosses, also known as X and O's. So Connect 4 is a similar game, except instead of having 3 in a row, you are aiming for 4 in a row. And that can be diagonal, that can be horizontal or vertical. And it's also a great way of learning a new programming language. So in our case, it would be Blazor.
No, that is true. And because we are all learning together, we are live and interactive. Please do use the chat window to ask us any questions, to share any thoughts you may have, whether you're on Twitch, you're on YouTube, any platform that you're on. Please interact with us. Let's have this let's make this a shared session so we can all learn together.
Yes, and welcome everyone. Please tell us where you're from. Kwaku, shout out to you joining us from Ghana.
Right, so let's speak about some of the prerequisites that we have for this module. As you can see, there is none, right? You don't need to have any prior knowledge for this particular module because it is a guided project. Everything is up on Microsoft Learn and it will guide you through building the game. However, having some background with HTML, CSS, and .NET will help you, but that is not needed for today's module. And with that, let's move on to our learning objectives. So today we'll be creating an app in Blazor. That is the main purpose of this module. We're going to learn how to manage state and how important state is when creating a game inside of any platform, not just Blazor. We'll also be using CSS to customize the appearance of our game and learning how that integrates with the Blazor framework. And throughout all of these steps, we will be building the Connect 4 game, as we've mentioned previously. What we'll also be doing is I think for the duration of the session, we'll be following the module as is on Microsoft Learn, starting out with an introduction. Then we will briefly talk about Blazor, what it is, why is it useful. We'll have a small exercise where we create a Blazor project in Visual Studio. Then we'll talk about the game logic and how the Connect 4 game works and how we can implement that logic. And then we will move on to customizing that specific game through personalized styles with CSS. Then we will do a quick knowledge check at the end to make sure that we've learned everything, and we'll end off with a nice summary. So with that, let's get started. What do you think, Lebo?
Sorry, I was on mute there. Yes, let's
Oh,
definitely get started. So the module that we'll be following, Homo, if I may ask, please add the link into the comments so that the people can follow along with us. In the meantime, I'll give a high-level overview. So we will be walking you through Blazor and introducing the following concepts: Blazor component fundamentals. So remember, Blazor is a language. So we'll be sharing what it's composed of and how to get started with building a Blazor web app project template, how to construct and use a layout for a Blazor component, and how to react using interactions. So, Homo, please move to the next slide. Yeah. And the thing that I love is that at the end, we would have built a Connect 4 game, you know. So, what I'll be walking you through are elements on how you can build a two-player game. You don't have to use the colors that we are using as we walk through it. But at the end, you will have a fully functioning two-player game that ends when one of the players win. So, Gomolemo has just posted the link um, to um, to the okay. Oh, so yeah, has just shared a link where you can also get a video by one of our colleagues, Burke, that shows you more in-depth details if you want to continue learning on Blazor. But I also want to share in the chat the link for the actual module so that you can have that. So, what is the main objective? To learn how to build an app in Blazor while learning its main components. I'm going to just quickly, I'm using two different machines and I apologize for that. I'm just going to quickly join with the other machine so that I can navigate this easily on my own.
but while she's doing that, just to quickly touch on the main objective of why we're doing this is because when you're learning any new framework, language, whatever have you, building a game is one of the most immersive ways to learn. And once you've built that game, you know, it's fun, it's easy to do. You can go ahead afterwards and really look at the intricate parts of that game and learn the depths of whatever framework you are learning, which is a great part of what we'll be doing here today. So let's quickly do a crash course on what Blazor is and why it's useful. Typically, when you are building web apps, there are many approaches to building web apps, right? And one of those approaches, especially when you're building full stack web apps, is to use JavaScript for your front end, for your client side. But with Blazor, you are able to use HTML and C# to build both the front end and the back end. And that is one of the main features of what makes Blazor such a great framework. But to take you more in depth, Lebo will just tell you a bit more about Blazor.
Thank you, Homo. And I hope I'm not echoing.
Now you're good.
All right, so over here, I have the learning module that we'll be using for today's learning path. And our friend Jamie Singleton has added the link to all the resources. So to follow with us, please go to aka.ms/let's learn/dotnet/Blazor. It will link you directly to this module. And okay, so the learning outcomes from our side, we're not gonna go through. Over here it says it's a 3 hour and 50-minute training. That's that's not what we're going to do. We're actually going to go through a specific module within that, which will take you from start to finish with the game. Okay, so I just want to navigate to that really quickly. So if you scroll down, as you can see, there's the introduction to web development with Blazor. We're going to skip all of that and come here where it says build a web app with no, it's actually the game one that I'm looking for. Yeah, build a Connect 4 game with Blazor. So it's the last module of the learning path. So you're gonna click there. And then as you can see, it's gonna say create an app in Blazor or manage a state to your app and customize appearance using CSS, as well as build Connect 4 game, right? And you might be asking yourself, hey, what is Blazor? You know, so let's start there, right? We've already explained to you the game that we'll be playing or building, but now you want to know this language that we'll be using, what is it, right? Homo has already gone through the objective. So Blazor is a framework for building web pages. What's really exciting about it is that it's a combination of HTML, CSS, and C Sharp. So a lot of you who are web developers or are learning how to do web development are normally accustomed to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So it's a similar concept where we use HTML and CSS for the actual structure of the game and C Sharp for the functionality. You know, so all the actions that we would want in the game, we would program them into C Sharp. One of the other things that Blazor includes is components, right, of the web pages. And these components are managed with C Sharp code and they run on a server or browser using a web standard known as WebAssembly. So you'll see once we've kicked off the project and we run it for the first time, even without writing any code, it will run on WebAssembly. So it will launch localhost port on your machine, where we will get like the hello world version of it. And just to dig a little bit more on WebAssembly, it is a standard technology available for modern browser, and it allows you to run code similar to JavaScript in the browser. So we can use tools to prepare our C Sharp code for use in browser, such as a WebAssembly app. And as we're working through our app and we want to see the changes that we are developing, we're going to use a feature in Visual Studio 2022 known as Hot Reload. This will allow us to instantly see the changes that we are implementing in our game live on the server or web app. And the actual Blazor components are as follows. So we have something known as Razor pages, and the Razor page would have a mix of HTML syntax as well as C Sharp code. And I'm going to zoom in so that you can actually see clearly over here what it looks like. So as you can see, we've got a div tag there, and it's got an at product.name. So it's actually referencing one of our objects. And then over here, we've got some C Sharp code that is nested under the add code bit. So all of this is under a Razor page, which we will show you once we've started our Visual Studio project. So honestly, for me, it was a little bit weird having pieces of HTML code as well as pieces of CSS and sometimes C Sharp all in one page. But it's really brilliant, and you'll see as we walk you through the steps that it's actually very easy for you to get started, even if you are new to programming. Okay, I'm gonna give Homo an opportunity to share with you how you can style a Blazor component.
Yes, so as we have it, let me just change the screen here. we are, as Lebo has said, we have different components that we use inside of Blazor. These Blazor components use the Razor syntax, which is a mixture of HTML and C#. But we can also style individual pages inside of Blazor as well. And a way of doing this, especially if you want to style a specific component, is that you can use a feature called CSS isolation that allows you to create styles that only apply to the contents of that component. When we are doing the demo later, you will see that we have a specific naming convention when we create Blazor components. And then if you want to have a CSS style sheet that's specific for that style, we just use the same name and we append it with the .css name filing tag. And you'll see how that style applies to that component. But we also have something where we can define the HTML head of the specific page inside of a Blazor component, and that's this head content tag that we have here. And you'll see how that plays out once we get to the actual demo. And one more thing we want to cover is the rootable components of Blazor, right? So when we go into the demo, you'll see that we have a file called home.razor. This is a file that is a component that you can navigate to when you're in a web browser, right? So if you are familiar with web pages and such, pages and components are terms that we will use interchangeably, but you will see exactly how it is that we route to these different pages inside of Blazor. We use a page derivative where we have the @ symbol where we specify C# code, then the page along with a slash, right? So all of that might not seem to make sense at the moment, but once we go into that demo, it will momentarily. So with that, we'll go into our exercise, our first exercise, which is actually creating that Blazor project inside of Visual Studio. Lebo, is your Visual Studio all powered up?
Yes, it is.
Perfect,
Okay.
perfect.
So as I shared earlier, I am using two screens. So do excuse me if I'm looking away from the camera. What we'd like you to do is open up your Visual Studio 2022. And what you're going to do is you're going to go to create. So let me just go back. Let me close this so that you can see everything. So the first thing you're going to do is go to File, New Project. And then you're going to choose Blazor Web App. Okay, I see you're not seeing I'm just gonna reshare my whole screen so that you can see, the different window that Visual Studio has opened. Right now it's not being presented. So I'm just gonna reshare. Okay, so what you're gonna name your project name is, yeah. Okay, this is weird, but basically I'm at the stage where it's saying configure your new project. I'm gonna share my entire screen because for some reason it's not showing all the pop-ups.
Lebo,
Okay,
I
that,
can just show that part if that's okay.
no, I've got it now.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to create a new Blazor web app. And because we're creating our game known as the Connect 4, that's what we're actually going to name our project, Connect 4. So over here, I'm just going to change the project name to Connect 4. And then you can choose any directory as to where to put it. I'm just gonna say the default. I'm actually gonna go one up because I might have the same project there, but let's just continue. Okay, and then you're going to choose .NET 8.0 framework if it's not the default, but for me it is, so I'm going to leave it as it is. Authentication type, make sure it's set to none. And the interactive render mode, make sure it says server. So these are the options that you have. So we're going to choose server, and everything else you're going to leave as the default. So your interactivity location should be per page per component. So I'm just going to click on create. So I'm just going to go back and rename this to Connect 40 because I've got the same project with the same name. Okay, so while that's creating, it's busy putting together our project. And as you can see, here on the right-hand side, we've got our Solution Explorer. So that's where we're gonna go to navigate between the different parts of the project. So we have a folder known as Components. So this folder has all our layout files. So as you can see, it has all our Razor pages, and it's got a folder known as Pages, which has the home, weather, error, and counter. And I'm just gonna click on F5 just to show you out of the box what a default Blazor app looks like. So it's now building our project. So I used the keyboard function keys to say F5. It will build our project and then it will run it in debug mode. So this will launch in your default web browser. So it hasn't, it's loading. Okay, so I'm just gonna bring this window here so that you can see it. So this is the default Blazor app. As you can see, it says, "Hello world, welcome to your new app." I'm gonna bring back Homo to take you forward.
Sure. So I'll just add my page to screen. And again, I'm also at the same page where Level was. This is the default app inside of Blazor. And the next part is to now build the board component, right? The board is the place where we will be playing our Connect 4 game. So let's exit this, go back to Visual Studio. Then we'll bring up our instructions from Microsoft Learn. Okay, we've created our app and we'll here with the create a board components, right? So first we're going to right click on the components folder in the Solution Explorer, choose add Razor components, and then we're going to name it board.razor, right? That's adding the component. So let's go back to Visual Studio. In our Solution Explorer, we're just going to go to our components. We're going to right click, select add, click on Razor component. It's paste in our board, and then we'll select add, right? And that is our component as we saw it earlier on. I'm gonna bring that up. If it's too small, do let me know. But it's similar to what Lebo explained earlier on. A standard component inside of Blazor is made up of HTML and C# code, right? This is where we can implement our C# code, our logic for what the component is. And then this is where we render what the user sees on the in the actual web browser. So with that, let's go back to our Learn module here, and then we'll see the next part is that we need to prepare the home page by opening the components pages home.razor file and clearing out everything after the third line with the page title tag. So when we ran the Blazor site for the first time, we actually ran the home components where we saw hello world and we saw welcome to your new app. So we're going to actually remove this, because what we want is we want to have the board, we want to have our game on our actual homepage. So what we do with that is we're going to be using the simple HTML syntax to bring about the board components. So that's all we have to do. So we created the board component here. It has the board tag over there. Then we brought it inside of our home page. That's how you can reference components in other pages like so. So if we were to run the app and we'll see the results of what we have done, you'll see that now the board tag is inside of home. We have all these other pages like the counter and the weather, but if we go to home, that's our board tag. And also, we also learned about something called hot reload, which is an amazing feature in Visual Studio that allows us to see our changes live as we are building. So what we'll do is, inside of our Visual Studio here, I'm just going to go to the board component and just add in my name. And then we'll click on the hot reload button here. And just by doing that, we should then see an instant change inside of our browser. So making those small changes and clicking that hot reload button allows us to quickly see the change as we are building the app, which I think is pretty cool. So let's minimize that and remove the change that we have made. And let's go to the next part of our application, which is now, okay, so we've ran the app, we've seen how hot reload works. Now we'll be adding actual content and style to our game board, right? So let's start by defining a game board with 7 columns and 6 rows. We'll add a little style to bring our board to life. Again, everything is in the Learn module, so as we go through it, we just have to take the code from the Learn module. So what we'll do is, in the board razor file, remove the HTML at the top and add the following content to define a board with 42 places for game pieces. So we'll represent those 42 pieces with a for loop that has 42 span tags. So let's copy this. And then let's go back to Visual Studio. Let's remove that HTML. Let's place that code in place. And then let's hit the hot reload button. That saves that. And let's see what that does, right? There is nothing, right? We've added the pieces. The code is actually there, but it's not. But we can't see anything because there is no styling, right? There's nothing that can tell us as viewers that there is something there. But just to prove that there is, we can just inspect our elements and we can expand our boards here. Let me just go to the right one so we can see that I'm not lying to you. And there's our board. There is the 42 span tag. So they are definitely there, but we just want to add some styling so we can actually see it in action. So let's go back to our Visual Studio, back to the Learn module, and let's see. So here we're going to be styling the components. Let's add some style to the board components by defining some colors for the frame of the board and the players above the first div tag in the board.razor file. So here is the code that we have. Let's go ahead and copy this head contents right there. And then what we'll do is we'll add that code right above our initial div tag. So let's just add a couple of white spaces there, and then we'll add the head contents there. That's all we have to do. Let's just verify that there's nothing else before we run the code again. So once we've added that, let's see, we need to add a new CSS file. But before that, let me explain the syntax of what this code is. And I hope you can see, I hope that's quite visible for you guys. So the syntax that we have is CSS, but we're creating CSS variables. We have three variables. We have board background, we have player 1, and we have player 2. And these are the colors of the different elements that we have. So in this case, our board is yellow, player 1 is red, player 2 is blue. And this will be picked up to be used in that Razor file. But we also need other stylings as well. And that's where we will add a complete CSS file. So we're going to right click on our Solution Explorer in the components folder and create a new CSS file called board.razor.css. So let me just copy this name. Let's go, and also let's copy this code. Let's go back to Visual Studio. I'm going to stop this because we're going to be adding new files. Let's right click on components. Let's add, right? So here I'm just going to say a new item. I'm going to name that item what we copied from Microsoft Learn, and we're going to add that in. So if you can see in our Solution Explorer, what that does is that it adds that board.razor.css file as a sort of child file to the board.razor file. Because it's using that same naming convention, board.razor, it knows that this is the CSS file only for the board components. So whatever styles I put in here will only apply to that board Razor components. So let's go ahead and copy or paste rather those styles from Microsoft Learn. There are all the styles pasted in. We'll go ahead and save that. And just to double check we've done everything that we need before we actually run the code. This is what we should see when we run the code. Let's go ahead and double check that. So I'm just running the file here. You can press the play button, you can press F5, whatever your preference is. And then hopefully we have a board with 42 pieces as the base of our Connect 4 game, right? Right now, obviously, this does nothing. We're still going to build on it. But just in those few steps, we built a basic component, we added a couple of styles, and we are already in a good place. But before we carry on, we need to go back to a little bit of theory, just to speak about the game logic and what it is to build a Connect 4 game. So Lebo will be taking us through some of that logic that we have there.
Thank you, Homo. So maybe whilst I restart the presentation on my side, can you show people what to expect as the final game, and then I can speak to them the actual logic as to how that came about.
Sure, I can do just that. Let me go ahead and roll up the game as it is at the end. So you'll see these are all our entry points to play the Connect 4 game. So let me show you. If I click on this, right, that will put in player 1's ball. And then I click it again, that is player 2's ball, right? And then obviously the more you play, you need to find out how to get 4 in a row. There's also some error handling as well, which is kind of cool. For example, if I were to fill up this row and then I would try and put in another one, right? It'll tell me that the column is full. So that's a nice piece of feedback that the game has as well. Let me show you what it means for someone to win the game actually. So I'll just do this. There you go. So you see now I have 4 in a row. It tells me that player 1 has 1, player 1 is red, and I can reset the game, right? That resetting of the game speaks to the actual game state and how you can manage states and how you can keep up with the current state of the game inside of Blazor as well. That's what we are building towards. But first, let's speak about that logic behind what the game actually is.
Thank you, Homo. So in this unit, we cover concepts like what does it mean for each player to have a turn? Also, how do you know if someone won? How do you define that logic to say, okay, this is player 1's turn, this is player 2's turn, and what does winning look like, right? So we'll show you all of that as to how you can construct that logic into the game. So as we shared earlier in the introduction, the idea behind Connect 4 is that you have to lay out 4 pieces together, either horizontally, vertically, or diagonally before your opponent does, right? So the first logic piece we're going to start off with is the reset state, which is the beginning of the game with a clean board that has no pieces. So the board that Gomolemo had shown that just had the yellow pieces, I'm just going to re-show it again. This is the reset stage. And then we're going to do the user places a game piece state. So I'm not sure if you saw as part of the UI, we actually had the board in yellow with a couple of arrows there. So Homo is going to walk you through as to how you add them. All of that is outlined in the learning path, so that when you place, so that we can mark areas where you can actually place one of those game pieces. And also to check if an opponent has already placed a game piece or not. And then also to check for a winner. If there's a winner, declare the winner and end the game or restart the game. So it's really up to you. So you can either end the game or reset it so that it restarts again. If there's no winner, meaning there's a stalemate, then we can go back to step 2, which is the player places a game piece, so it's a repeating loop. Okay, so over here I'm going to walk you through how you represent that state in code form. I'm just going to zoom in so that you can see. I'm going to use this magnifier. Okay, so we're going to start off with a C# class called class state. And then there we're going to have an array of players of type player. And then we're going to have an integer that represents the number of game rounds played. And then we're going to have a Boolean that says whether or not the game is over. So over here, I've got my constructor called state. We start off with initializing the new players. So here, as you can see, we're creating the 2 objects, one for player, which is the first player, and the other for an opponent, with a default points for both as 0. The number of games played initially is also going to be 0, and game over will have a default state of false. This is when we are initializing the actual state of the game. And then we're going to define our reset game method. So we're going to say game over is equals to false as an initial value. And then we're going to assign to position 0 of our players array points 0, and position 1 0.0. So essentially we are saying it's a 2-player game and it's starting off with each player having a 0 point. And then we're going to define our end game method with game over being equals to true, as well as game rounds played being something that we increment each time that a player plays. And then we will award the winner. So that's just a comment over there. I'm just going to zoom out. Okay, so like for me, before this game, I had never played a 4-point game piece. I'm used to X and O's, which is 3 pieces, but the logic is essentially the same. So once the game is initialized, meaning we are starting off the game, we're going to call our reset game method. So as soon as the game starts, we're calling the state.reset game, meaning everything that we've outlined over here will be the status of the game, and then we start playing. Okay, and now once the game starts, we have to now handle the actual players' interactions. You know, when you or your opponent makes a move, we need to be able to capture that interaction. So one thing that we're going to show is when a player clicks to play a piece, we're going to call the onClick method that's going to call the play piece, and with wherever it is that the opponent would have chosen on the board, you know. So we will show you that on the code as well, so that you know where it goes. But if we don't keep record of that, we'll never know if you or your player has already played. So that's why it's very important to always keep track of that record status. So over here, we're trying to show that when an action happens in the game, it should affect the state of the game, right? So I'm just going to zoom into this piece so that I can walk through it. It's still the same. It's still parts of the code that falls under your state class. So here we have an array of pieces. Remember, we started off with a 2-person array of players. Now we're going to have an array of pieces, which is our game pieces. And we're also going to initialize those pieces in our state constructor. Remember, in this specific code snippet, I have omitted other pieces of code that are in the constructor so that we can focus on how we are initializing the pieces. So initially, we're going to start off with 25 pieces because we have a 5x5 board. And then we're also going to have a play piece method that's going to take in a position as a parameter. So how it's going to work is that if someone, so it's going to call the pieces array with a position that's part of the board and true, meaning that piece on the board has been occupied. If it's false, it means it's empty. So this is only going to turn true each time a player plays, but by default, it will be false. Cool. So I'm going to hand over back to Gomolemo to show you the implementation of this logic.
Thank you so much, Lebo. So with that, we're gonna move back to our demo, back to our exercise where we'll be talking about game states and adding that state to our game. We're going to be creating the game pieces that are necessary for us to actually play the game. For example, the demo that I showed off, those pieces falling into place. We're going to be showing you how you can choose a specific column to place your pieces in, as well as some of the error handling that I showed off earlier as well. So with that, let's go on to our exercise. Let me just switch screens here real quick. Back to our learn module. And you'll see the first thing is that we need to add the game state class. So as Lebo was explaining, game state in this instance is represented by a simple C# class. And to keep with the theme of learning about Blazor, we're just going to have that game state class already configured for us. So here is the link to that class. So we'll just open up the link. We'll do a quick copy. And then let's go back to our code here. And what we'll do is we're going to add a new class in the root of our project. So let's go ahead and add a new class. Let's call that class game state. There you go. And then we'll just replace the code inside of the state. Again, just keeping the theme of learning purely about Blazor. Just trust me in saying that this is the code that deals with the game state. So now we need to reference this. How do we use this as an active class inside of our game? So we're going to be opening the program.cs file, which deals with the actual implementation of the various aspects of our project. And here we need to add a statement to configure that game state class that we've just added as a singleton service inside of our app. So we will create an instance of that class one time throughout our app, and we will reference that to constantly monitor the state of our app. So inside of our learn module, we'll come back here. You'll then see there's this builder.services line here that we'll just go ahead and copy. Let's minimize that back to our Visual Studio. And right below this, we'll just add that in right there. So let's save that. Now the project is aware of the game state class. We can now inject an instance of this game state class into our board components. Let's go back to our board components, which we've been building out here. And let's go back to our learn module. And you'll see that to add that instance, we need to add the following inject directive at the top of the board.razor file to inject the current state of the game into the components. Right, so let's copy that, go back to Visual Studio, and at the very top, we will add that dependency injection. This just allows us to monitor. This is the code representation of monitoring the state of our app. Is there a winner? Is there an error? Is the column full? All of those states that Lebo just spoke about, that is how we're going to be monitoring it. So then let's speak about the initial phase of our game. At the beginning of our game with a clean board with 0 points, that reset state. How do we set up that reset state? So let's go back to our module here, and you'll see, let's begin by resetting the state of the game when the board component is first painted on screen, right? We'll add some code to reset the state of the game when the component is initialized. So Lebo briefly spoke about that uninitialized method that we can use inside of our code component. We will use that to call the reset board method from our game state class. So let's copy this and let's go back to Visual Studio. Inside of our board components, we will look for this code block, and then we'll just replace that with this uninitialized method. So as soon as that page runs, as soon as you refresh the page, it'll reset the board to the reset state. Remember, the state is coming from this dependency that we have stated here from that game state class. So that's all we have to do to reset the board. The next part is that we need to now create the actual game pieces that come into the board as we are playing. So if we go back to our learn module, let's see, the create game pieces section. So we need to allocate the possible 42 game pieces that could be played inside of our board. So we can represent the game pieces as an array referenced by 42 HTML elements in the board, which we did towards the beginning of our demo. We just have to fill that in a bit more. So what we'll do is we're going to be defining a string array field in the code block to hold our game pieces, right? And then we're going to add the code to the HTML section that creates 42 span tags, one for each game piece. So obviously we're not going to use all 42 games in a single play. However, there's 42 possible places in the board where players can put in their boards. And that is the important part of what we are doing here. So first, let's go ahead and get that array to represent the game pieces. We'll go back to Visual Studio. We'll put that inside our code block. And that's the amazing thing about Blazor, right? You can implement our C# logic and reference the HTML elements all within the same page. Once we have our pieces configured there, then we need to add the HTML code that creates 42 span tags inside of our board. So what we do there, we're going to take this piece, and then once we take this initial piece, the full body of code should look like this. So what I'll do is I'll just copy out the code as is. Let's do this real quickly. Let's copy out the code. And then from that, we will bring it into our board piece there. So this is the div. And then we go back to our code here. And then let's replace our div from the learn module. So we have the visual representation of the onboard, but then we also have the possible pieces that can be implemented in that same place, right? So every time I drop in a ball as a player, those pieces come through, right? So from that, let's see if there's any questions so far. No questions at the moment, but please bring them in if you do have something you'd like to ask us. Let's go back to our learn module, and you'll see that what we've just done is that it assigns an empty string to the CSS class of each game piece. Like I said, there's 42 possible places where those pieces can be. So they're empty for now, but then as the pieces get added, they will have a value that we can visibly see on screen. And that is the next part where we're going to be handling the game piece placement. So here we'll be adding a method to handle when a player pastes a piece in a column, right? The GameState class knows how to assign the correct row for the game piece and reports back the row that it lands in. We can use this information to assign a CSS class representing the player's color, the final location of the piece, and the CSS drop animation. So in simple terms, when we click on that column to say we want to drop something here, the game state is able to let us know that the player has selected this specific column, and it's able to track whether or not that row is full or whether there's certain pieces in that row, and the piece will drop to the correct row location. And then it'll also, because it knows the state of whose player's turn it is and what color is that player, it will correctly assign the correct CSS color to that piece. So if it's player one's turn and player one is represented by red, and I choose the first column and the first row, it knows to assign a red ball to that specific place. So what we'll do is we'll add the code below the pieces array here that we defined in the previous step. So let's copy that and let's go to Visual Studio. Below the pieces array, let's just go ahead and play that. So this is the play piece method that we have here. So to explain exactly what that play piece method does, again, we tell the game state to play a piece in the submitted column called call, which represents a column, and capture the row that the piece landed in. Exactly what I've just said earlier on. We can then define the 3 CSS classes assigned to the game piece to identify which player is currently acting, the column piece was placed in, and the landing row. Then the last line of the method assigns these classes to that game piece in the pieces array. So that is why state is important. State tells us which player is playing. State will also tell us what is the color of that player, and state will also tell us where is the location of that piece, and it'll assign those specific classes. The resultant effect is that the game piece is placed in the column and animated to drop into the bottommost row when the method is called. And that brings us to the next part, which is choosing the specific column. So in our demo, we saw all of those arrows. So what happens when you choose that specific column? We next need to place some controls that allows players to choose a column and call our new play piece method. We'll use the down arrow character to indicate that you can drop a piece in this column. So above the starting div tag, add a row of clickable buttons. So let's copy this code as is. Let's go back to Visual Studio. And above the div tag, but below the head content tag, we'll go ahead and add those rows. Click to play a piece, which is represented by those down arrows. So all those down arrows that you saw in the demo, this is how we implement it there. And it's inside a for loop because we need 7 of those arrows to represent all 7 columns, right? So if we go back to our learn module, you'll see that the onClick attribute specifies an event handler for the click events. But to handle UI events, a Blazor component needs to be rendered using an interactive render mode. By default, Blazor components are rendered from the server. We can apply an interactive render mode to a component using the render mode attribute. Update the board component on the home page to use the interactive server render mode. So let's go ahead and copy that render mode. And let's go back to our code. We're going to open up the home component and update this so that the board renders in the interactive server way. The reason why we're choosing interactive server, and it goes back to what Lebo said earlier on, when we're handling events inside of Blazor, those events happen in the actual clients, right? So when I click something, when I press something on my keyboard, these are events that are acted by the user. Those are on the client, but those events are handled in the backend on the server. So if you go back to our board and you see that when we click on that specific piece, then we handle that on-click event by calling the play piece method. So that's how we handle that event from the browser in our server in the backend. So that is why we need to have that interactive server render mode active inside of our components. Again, let's go back to our learn module here. If you run the app with these changes, it should look like this now. Let's go ahead and test that right now. And hopefully we are at the point where it looks exactly how it does inside of the module. Let's go ahead. It's running all our changes now. And there you go. This is what is happening at the moment. So when I'm clicking, it is running that, that event, right? When I click, it activates that on-click handler, that on-click event, and then we handle that by calling the play piece method. That play piece method drops a ball. It understands whose player it is, and it understands the color of that player. And that's how we see it there. However, because we are playing it and we have the play piece, what happens when I run out of space? There's an error, right? Because there's no longer any spaces to do anything. We haven't done the correct error handling to handle that case. Furthermore, I'll go ahead and continue. Let's do a reload. What if someone wins, right? So let's go ahead and have someone win, right? So clearly the red has won. If I play again, there's an error, right? So there's two things we need to handle. We need to handle someone winning, and then we need to handle when the column is full. So with that, let's go ahead and stop our application here. Let's go ahead and go to our Razor, to our board Razor component. Let's go back to our Learn module, and let's handle the winning and the error handling. So insert the following markup after the nav element. So this element, this article element here, I'm going to copy that. And inside of our code, after the nav, I'm going to add it to here, right? This allows us to display the winner message if there's a winner. It also allows us to have a button to reset the game once there is a winner. But also, it allows us to show errors when the column is full or when something goes wrong. That's going to be shown here. And it also allows us to show whose turn it is. So is it player one's turn or is it player two's turn? But there's a bunch of errors because we haven't actually set these variables out correctly. So going back to our Learn module here, let's go down and let's fill in the logic for those values. So here is the logic, the C# logic that we have here. Let's copy that. Let's go back to Visual Studio and let's paste it over there. And we'll see we have the winner message, we have the error message, both are currently empty. You know, it makes sense. You know, when the game begins, there is no winner, there is no error. And then we have the way in which those variables are played out. So let's go back to our Learn module to learn exactly how that happens. So the current turn property, which is this one, is automatically calculated based on the state of the winner message and the player turn property of the game state, right? So the current turn will check, is the winner message empty? In other words, is there no winner yet? If there's no winner yet, let me display the current player's turn. That's all that says. Then the reset style property is calculated based on the contents of the winner message. If there's a winner message, or in simple terms, if there's a winner of the game, we make the reset button show on screen. So if someone has won, we need to reset the game. We need to display the button enable for us to reset the game. But now we need to handle our error messages, right? When a piece is played. So add a line to clear the error message and then wrap the code in the play piece method with the try catch block to set the error message if an exception has occurred. So here's our try catch block here. Let's go ahead and copy that. And let's go ahead and put all of this in a, oops, sorry, wrong thing. Let me go ahead and copy the correct code for you there. You need to put it all in a try catch method. So let's go ahead and do that for you. Just copying the code from our thing here. So this allows us to check for all of these states that we need for our game to actually display the correct messages to the user. So there you go. That play piece method now has a try catch block inside of it to make sure that we are handling those scenarios carefully. So let's go back to our learn module here. It wants us to test the game. Our error handler indicator is simple and uses the Bootstrap CSS framework to display an error in danger mode. Before I do that, let's see if what we have done works. So now what should happen is errors. Let's see what the errors are. Oh, we don't have the reset game method set. Let's go ahead and set that reset game method. As you can see, it's over here. So I'll go and copy that, put it in Visual Studio, right here. And what that reset game method does, similar to what Lebo said earlier on, that reset method, it resets the state of the board, right? It hides all the indicators that we have, and it resets the pieces to be empty so that the board is completely clean for us to play once again. This update should allow us to now play the game again. So let me go ahead and run the app. I'll check if you have additional questions in chat. Let's see. Lebo, do you have any questions?
No, so there aren't
at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay, we should be finishing up quite soon. So as you can see, we can still play the game. You can see the states is being tracked there, all the players' turns. If we have a full column, it should let us know. And of course, if there's a winner, it should let us know as well. There you go. Or do we not have the winner tag yet? Let me go ahead and check that inside our code. Okay, we don't. So let's go back to our learn module. This actually tells us who the winner is, and it also enables that. So let's go ahead and copy that and put that into our play piece method right there. Let's do a hot reload, and we should be able to see who the winner is. Let's go ahead and hit a refresh. I hope this is the correct. Let's go ahead and run the app. Sorry, just making sure that it's working correctly. And very quickly, let's make Louis the winner. There you go. Player 2 wins, reset the game. So we're at a very good point. Basically, we're at the end of the game. But there is a small piece, if we have about 5 minutes, just to customize how the game actually looks. Let's go ahead and do that very quickly. So let's just say you don't like the colors of the game, right? You are able to play with the CSS variables that we have in order for you to customize exactly how the game looks. And I'll just quickly do that for you here. So in the board.razor file, let's define these 3 properties for the board color. Each player's color before the uninitialized method, add these lines of code, right? So let's add these lines of code inside of Visual Studio before the uninitialized method. This tracks the board color, the player color, both of the player colors. Of course, you see some errors there. We don't have those references. So inside of learn, we need to make sure that we add a reference to the system.drawing package. Let's add that as a namespace inside of our board components. Let's double check if that sorts out that issue. Yes, it does. And then we can add this head content to the top of the board raiser component to set our own distinct variables. Let's go ahead and copy that. We go back to Visual Studio. At the very top, let's replace the head content. So you'll see what this does is that it actually references the variables that we have set inside of our C#. So we can set our own colors, right? And how we do that is we set our own colors by referencing it when we call the board component in our home page. So let's copy that, go to our home page, replace this call to the board component. As you can see, black for the board color, green for player 1, purple for player 2. Let's hot reload that. Okay, it seems like we need to do a full rerun. And with those new colors, you'll now see that the board is different, right? You're able to customize those board colors. Same thing if I were to make this a brown, for example, do a hot reload, then the board color now should be brown, which is a nice touch to have to this kind of application. So there is that. We have built the Connect 4 game, and Lebo will take us through a quick knowledge check to make sure that we have learned everything we need to for this module.
Thank you, Homo. So I hope you've all been following. So I've also been on the background doing the exercises as Homo is walking us through it. So we're going to do a quick knowledge check. I'm going to ask you a few questions. It's a multiple choice question. Please share your answer as a comment.
Sure, let's get to the first question.
Yes. So how do you respond to a click event? Remember, Homer had an on-click event. Do you use, oh, I just gave it, okay. Do you use @click equals handler? Or B, use on-click equals handler? Or C, @onClick equals handler? So I'm going to
Again, you
give
can
you,
write your answers in chat
yeah.
if you have them. And just think about the code that we use. Again, events are what happens usually in the actual browser. So click events, pressed. There's so many different events that we can respond to, but how does that syntax work? You see, we have
So
someone
far,
saying
I see
C.
one response from Lebogang, and they are correct. So the answer is @onClick equals handler. Okay,
Sure.
so let's get a few more participants. Question 2. In what component method would you place the logic that you would like to initialize your component? Is it A, in the onInitialized method? Or is it B, in the constructor? Or is it C, in the onStart method? So I'm going to give you guys a few seconds to share your answers in the chat. In what component method would you place logic that would initialize your component? So we've got a few answers coming in. Kokora says A. Lebogang says A. Okay.
I guess it's in the name, right? So
Someone learning Java says C. So the correct answer is actually A. So remember, this is a good place to put such a method. So if you're looking to initialize any logic, especially for your component, the on initialized method is a good one. All right. And then I've got one more question. So question 3. How can a component handle a specific root? Is it A, add a root directive at the top of the component? Or is it B, add a add page directive at the top of the component? For example, add page my hyphen component. Or is it C, inject the root manager class and register the root as its handler? So I did kind of give it
This is a
away.
tricky one. Yeah.
Yeah, so Noah is celebrating there for guessing it correctly. So yes, it is B. Most of you got that one correct. And if you've just joined in, we were learning how to program in Blazor by creating a game called Connect 4. So we've shared the resources of the learning path that is freely available on Microsoft Learn. Please have a look, walk through it, and share screenshots, maybe also on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn of your game. We'd like to see how you would have customized it to your own colors, maybe even shrink the board to actually be 4x4. I don't know if you noticed, Homo had 42 pieces, so his game was 6x7, but you can really customize it to whatever you want. And what I like is that the actual learning module from from start to finish, takes you from scratch to an actually full functional game that you can play. So just to recap for everyone, we did cover the Connect 4 game using Blazor. And we will also share again in the chat the link, the short URL. So that is the actual URL path that you are seeing. However, I will share it in the chat so that you can get the short URL, which is aka.ms/letslearn.net/Blazor. Okay. Yeah, and that's it from us. Thank you so much for joining us from all across the continent. We really appreciate you being here with us this evening, and we look forward to hosting you again. Homo,
Thank you.
beautiful
Cheers.
and lovely walkthrough. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.